The road was empty at 6:47 in the morning. That is the detail that stays with me. Not the flashing lights. Not the voice on the radio. Not even what happened after. Just that empty road. And a man driving his son to college. And the way everything can change in the space of a single breath. Harlan Cross had been awake since 5. Not because he had to be. Because he wanted to be. He wanted the quiet of the kitchen before the house came alive. The first cup of coffee standing at the window, watching the backyard fill with pale morning light. He wanted to memorize it. The stillness of a house that was about to get a little emptier. Callum was leaving for college today. Harlan had known this day was coming for 19 years. He had planned for it, saved for it, prayed for it. He had sat at that same kitchen table when Callum was 4 years old and traced the letters of the University of Georgia fight song on a paper napkin just to make the boy laugh. He had driven past the campus 3 times in the last month, not for any reason, just to look at it, just to picture his son walking through those gates. And now the day was here. Callum came downstairs at 6:15 wearing a gray hoodie and basketball shorts, his hair still flat on one side from sleep. He was 19 years old, 5 feet 11, with his mother's eyes and his father's jaw and the kind of easy confidence that comes from never once being made to feel small. He dropped into a chair at the kitchen table and reached for the orange juice like it was any other morning. Harlan watched him and felt something he could not name. Not sadness exactly. More like the specific weight of a moment you know you will carry for the rest of your life. Sylvia came down 20 minutes later. She had already been crying once, privately in the bathroom, the way she always handled the things that were too big to say out loud. She pressed both hands against Callum's face and held it for a long moment, studying him like she was memorizing every detail. "You call me when you get there," she said. "Mom, every day. Mom, every single day, Callum." Harlan loaded the car while they said their goodbyes. A plastic bin of clothes, a desk lamp, a small fan, a set of sheets Sylvia had washed and folded 3 times. And at the very bottom of the trunk, tucked under a rolled-up rug, a framed photograph. Harlan and Callum at a Braves game. Callum may be 11 years old. Both of them may laugh at something neither of them could remember anymore. Sylvia had slipped it in without telling either of them. They pulled out of the driveway at 6:41. Sylvia stood on the front porch in her robe and waved until they turned the corner. Harlan watched her in the rear view mirror until she disappeared. The car was a 2019 Camry, registered under Sylvia's name. Silver. A small dent above the rear left a well from a parking garage incident 3 years ago that Harlan kept meaning to fix. Nothing about it announced anything. Nothing about it said anything at all. That was the point. On any given weekday, Harlan Cross drove a different car. A black government issue sedan with federal plates. He wore a suit. He carried a badge and a firearm on the full weight of the United States Department of Justice behind every step he took. He was a special agent in charge of the FBI field office in Atlanta, Georgia. 214 agents under his command. Jurisdiction across the entire northern district of the state. 17 years with the Bureau. For commendations to cases that had gone to the Supreme Court. But today was not a weekday. Today he was just a father in a silver Camry, driving his son to college. Listening to Callum scroll through a playlist and argue with himself about which song to play first. They had been on the road for 11 minutes when the lights came on behind them. Blue and white, filling the rear view mirror. No siren, just the lights, pulsing in the early morning gray. Harlan checked his speed. 41 miles per hour in a 45 zone. He checked his mirrors. Both lanes clear. He had signaled every turn. He had done nothing. He had committed no violation, broken no law, given no reason. He pulled over anyway. He pulled over the way every black man in America earns to pull over. Smooth, slow, both hands visible on the wheel, before the car even stopped moving. He did not reach for the glove compartment. He did not reach for his phone. He placed both hands at 10 and 2 and he waited. Callum had gone quiet. The music stopped. "Dad," Callum said softly. "I know," Harlan said. "Hands on your knees. Don't move them." Callum looked at him. His jaw was tight. His eyes were doing the thing Harlan had seen in them only a handful of times. That particular combination of confusion and fear, and something that had not yet hardened into anger, but was getting close. Harlan had given Callum the talk when he was 14. He had sat across from his son at this same kitchen table and explained, as calmly and clearly as he could, the rules. Not the rules of the law. The other rules. The ones that kept you alive. Hands visible. Voice slow. No sudden movements. Yes, sir. No, sir. Do not argue. Do not explain. Do not reach for anything without announcing it first. Come home. Callum had listened in silence. When Harlan finished, his son had looked at him for a long moment and asked quietly, "Why do we have to know all that?" "Because the world is not finished yet," Harlan had said. "And until it is, we have to be smarter than it." Now, 5 years later, sitting in a silver Camry on a Georgia highway at 6:47 in the morning, Harlan Cross put his hands on his knees and did not move them. The officer took his time. Harlan watched in the side mirror. The patrol car sat behind them for 1 minute and 40 seconds before the door opened. The officer was broad-shouldered, mid-30s, with the kind of walk that announces itself. Deliberate. Unhurried. The walk of a man who has decided something before he has seen anything. Sergeant Law Gantry had been with the Cobb County Sheriff's Department for 11 years. He had been named Officer of the Quarter twice. He had a commendation letter from the previous sheriff framed on the wall of his office. He coached youth football on weekends and went to church on Sundays and genuinely believed, in the way that certain men believe things without ever examining them, that he was one of the good ones. He was not a man who thought of himself as prejudiced. He thought of himself as experienced. He thought of himself as someone who could read a situation. He had a word for it: instinct. What his instinct told him, when he saw a silver Camry with a small dent above the rear, left wheel well moving through this particular stretch of highway at this particular hour, was that something was worth checking. He had not clocked the speed. He had not observed a traffic violation. He had seen two black men in a car that did not match the neighborhood, and he had turned on his lights. He would not have described it that way. He never did. He reached the driver's side window and looked in. Harlan had already rolled it down, both hands on the wheel. Callum's hands visible on his knees. Everything exactly as it should be. Gantry looked at Harlan for a moment without speaking. Then he looked at Callum, then back at Harlan, license and registration. His voice was flat, not hostile, not polite. The voice of a man who has already made a decision and is now going through the motions of justifying it. Harlan moved slowly and deliberately. He announced every movement before he made it. "I am reaching into my back left pocket for my wallet." He produced his driver's license. "I am reaching into the glove compartment for the registration." He opened it slowly, retrieved the document, and handed both through the window. Gantry looked at them. His eyes moved between the license and Harlan's face. "Where are you headed this morning?" "Taking my son to college," Harlan said. "University of Georgia. Moving day." Gantry glanced at Callum again. Callum looked straight ahead. "You know why I pulled you over?" "No, sir," Harlan said. "I don't." Something in Gantry's expression shifted. "Not much. Just enough." The question had been a test, and Harlan had failed it by answering honestly instead of guessing. "You are drifting," Gantry said. "Lane departure." "I observed it back on Windy Hill." Harlan said nothing. He had not drifted. He knew he had not drifted. The dashcam mounted on his windshield, a small black device Sylvia had installed after a fender bender 2 years ago, had recorded every second of the last 11 minutes. He knew what it showed. He said nothing. Gantry took the license and registration back to his patrol car. He was gone for 4 minutes and 18 seconds. Harlan counted. He did not turn around. He did not check his phone. He sat with both hands on the wheel and he breathed. "Dad," Callum said quietly. "I know. He didn't see anything. You didn't do anything wrong. I know. So why are we just sitting here?" Harlan looked at his son. Callum was gripping his own knees now, knuckles tight, jaw set. He was not afraid anymore. He was angry, and Harlan understood that anger completely, because he had felt it himself for 30 years. And he also understood something Callum did not yet fully know. That anger, in this moment, in this car, on this road, was the most dangerous thing in the world. Because we're going to get you to college today, Harlan said. That's why. Callum looked at him for a long moment, then he looked away. Gantry came back. Step out of the vehicle, please. Harlan did not move immediately. He kept his voice level. Can you tell me the reason for that request? Gantry's eyes hardened. I said step out of the vehicle. I heard you, Harlan said. I'm asking for the legal basis. There it was. The thing Gantry did not expect. Not argument, not aggression, not compliance. A question. Calm, specific, and entirely within Harlan's rights. Gantry's jaw tightened. Sir, I'm not going to ask you again. Harlan opened the door and stepped out. He did not slam it. He did not raise his hands above his head in a gesture of surrender. He simply stood beside the car, hands visible at his sides, and looked at Gantry with the particular stillness of a man who has been in far more dangerous rooms than this one. Gantry was taller by 2 inches. He used the height. You got anything in the car I should know about? No. Weapons? Drugs? No. You mind if I take a look? Yes, Harlan said. I do mind. I do not consent to a search. The word consent landed like a stone in still water. Gantry stared at him. You're being uncooperative. I'm exercising my constitutional rights, Harlan said. That's not the same thing. Something moved behind Gantry's eyes. It was not quite anger. It was the specific frustration of a man who is used to compliance, who has built his entire professional identity around the assumption that people will do what he says, and who is now standing in front of someone who will not. Someone who is not afraid of him. Someone who is looking at him like he is being studied. Gantry reached for his radio. He called it in, ran the plates, requested a check on the license. The radio crackled. Dispatch came back in under 90 seconds. Renee Fowler had been working dispatch for the Cobb County Sheriff's Department for 9 years. She had heard everything. She had a voice that stayed steady through accidents, on shootings, and domestic calls at 3 in the morning. She was not a woman who rattled easily. She rattled now. The plates came back registered to a Sylvia Cross. She ran the name on the license. Harlan Cross. She ran it through the standard database first, then the secondary, then the federal cross-reference system that most dispatchers used maybe twice a year. She stared at her screen for 3 seconds. Then she pressed the button. Sergeant Gantry. Go ahead. Can you confirm the name on the license you submitted? Harlan Cross. Harlan. Cross. Cross. A pause. For seconds. 5. 6. Sergeant. Her voice had changed. It was lower now. Careful. The voice of someone choosing every word. I need you to listen to me very carefully right now. Gantry frowned. He turned slightly away from Harlan, dropping his voice. What is it? The individual you have stopped. She paused again. Harlan Cross is the special agent in charge of the Atlanta FBI field office. Gantry did not respond. Sergeant, did you copy that? The silence stretched for 7 seconds. Harlan watched Gantry's back. He watched the slight change in the set of the man's shoulders, the almost imperceptible stiffening, the pause before the next breath. Gantry turned around. He looked at Harlan differently now. Not with respect, not with apology, with the particular expression of a man who has just realized he is standing on ice and is trying to calculate how thick it is. Harlan looked back at him. His face gave nothing away. He had not moved. His hands were still at his sides. His voice, when he spoke, was exactly the same as it had been from the beginning. Are we done here, Sergeant? Gantry opened his mouth, closed it, and then he did the thing that defined him. The thing that would follow him for the rest of his life. The thing that Renee Fowler, still on the open radio line, heard clearly. The thing that Pete Dunbar, a 53-year-old contractor who had pulled his truck off the road 200 feet back when he saw the stop and had been recording on his phone for the last 6 minutes, captured in full. Gantry stepped forward. He put one hand on Harlan's shoulder, and he pushed. Not a shove, not a shove, not a strike, A push. Deliberate. Dismissive. The kind of physical contact that says, without words, "You are beneath me, and I can touch you whenever I want." Harlan did not stumble. He absorbed it and stood still. But Callum saw it. Callum had been watching through the windshield the entire time. He had watched his father stand in the road and speak calmly and refuse to be diminished. He had watched and he had been proud, he had been terrified in equal measure. And now he watched a uniformed officer put his hand on his father's shoulder and push him. The car door opened. "Dad." His voice cracked on the single syllable. Gantry spun toward the car. His hand went to his belt. "Stay in the vehicle." His voice was sharp now, stripped of the flat professional tone. "Stay in the vehicle right now." Callum had both feet on the pavement. He was not aggressive. He was not threatening. He was a 19-year-old boy who had just watched someone put their hands on his father and he had forgotten. For one terrible second, everything he had been taught. Harlan turned. He looked at his son. And in that moment, in the space between one breath and the next, something passed between them that had no words. Harlan's eyes said, "I know. I know exactly what you feel. I have felt it every day of my life." His eyes said, "I need you to trust me." His eyes said, "Please." Callum stood on the pavement for 3 seconds. His jaw was working. His hands were shaking. He was 19 years old and he was furious and heartbroken, and he was looking at his father, who was standing in a road in Georgia with a police officer's handprint on his shoulder. And his father was asking him, without a single word, to get back in the car. Callum got back in the car. He pulled the doors shut. He put his hands back on his knees. He stared straight ahead through the windshield and he did not look away and he did not make a sound. But his eyes were wet, not from fear, from something that does not have a clean name. The feeling of being 19 years old and learning, in the most visceral way possible, that the world your father warned you about is not a story. It is a road. It is a Tuesday morning. It is a silver Camry and a man in a uniform and a push that nobody was supposed to see. Gantry turned back to Harlan. "I'm going to need you to put your hands behind your back." "On what charge?" Harlan said. "Obstruction. Failure to comply." "I complied with every lawful order," Harlan said. "I declined an unlawful search." "That is not obstruction." "Hands behind your back, now." Harlan looked at him for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, "You should think very carefully about what you do next." It was not a threat. It was not a boast. It was the statement of a man who knew exactly what was coming and was giving another man one final opportunity to step back from the edge. Gantry did not step back. The handcuffs clicked into place at 7:03 in the morning. Pete Dunbar, sitting in his truck 200 feet back, had been recording for 8 minutes and 41 seconds. He had a clear, unobstructed view of the entire stall. He had the push. He had the handcuffs. He had Callum opening the car door and Gantry's hand going to his belt and Harlan's eyes finding his son's through the windshield. He had all of it. He did not drive away. He sat in his truck with his phone in his hands and he watched and he kept recording and he thought about his own son, who was 22. And he thought about what it would mean to watch someone put handcuffs on his boy's father on the side of a road for doing nothing wrong. And he thought about what kind of man he wanted to be when he got home that night and his wife asked him how his morning was. He kept recording. Inside the patrol car, Gantry was on the radio again. His voice had lost its certainty. It was still controlled, still professional in its cadence, but something underneath it had shifted. The ice was cracking and he could feel it. Renee Fowler was still on the line. "Sergeant," she said, "I need to inform you that this call is being recorded and logged. I also need to inform you that I have already notified my supervisor of the situation." Gantry said nothing. "I strongly advise you to release the individual immediately." Gantry looked through the windshield at Harlan, who was standing beside the patrol car with his hands cuffed behind his back, looking at nothing in particular. Not at Gantry, not at the road, just standing there with the particular stillness of a man who has decided that the most powerful thing he can do right now is wait. Gantry got out of the car. He stood in front of Harlan. He was looking for something in the man's face. Anger, maybe, or fear. Something he could use. Something that would make him feel like he still had control of this situation. He found neither. He found patience. The deep, settled patience of a man who has spent 17 years building cases, who understands that evidence accumulates, that every second that passes is another second on Pete Dunbar's recording, another entry in the log that Renee Fowler is building, another brick in a wall that is going to come down on Lyle Gantry's head. "I was just doing my job," Gantry said. His voice was quieter now. Harlan looked at him. "Were you?" "I observed a lane departure." "No," Harlan said. "You didn't. And you know you didn't." Gantry's jaw tightened. "You saw a black man in a car that didn't fit your picture of this neighborhood at this hour," Harlan said. "And you made a decision. And then you made another one. And then another one. And every single one of them is on camera." Gantry looked up. His eyes went to Pete Dunbar's truck. He had not noticed it before. The phone was still raised. Something left Gantry's face in that moment. Not all at once. In stages. The way a building comes down when the supports are removed one by one. The certainty went first, then the authority, then the performance of confidence he had been wearing since he opened his car door 40 minutes ago. What remained was something smaller. A man standing on a highway in the early morning light, beginning to understand the full weight of what he had done. He uncuffed Harlan at 7-Eleven. He did not apologize. He handed back the license and registration without making eye contact. He said, in a voice that had gone very flat, "You're free to go." Harlan took the documents. He turned and walked back to the Camry. He opened the driver's side door and sat down and closed it quietly. Callum was looking at him. Neither of them spoke for 1 minute and 53 seconds. The radio was off. The road outside was empty. Morning light was coming through the windshield at a low angle. And somewhere in the distance a bird was making a sound that seemed absurdly peaceful given everything. Then Callum said, his voice low and careful, "Dad, what do you do?" "For the government." Harlan looked straight ahead for a moment. Then he turned to his son. "I investigate people like him," he said. Callum stared at him. His mouth opened slightly. He looked out the windshield at the patrol car, still sitting behind them. Gantry, a motionless shape behind the glass. Then he looked back at his father. "Then why didn't you just tell him?" Harlan was quiet for a long moment. "Because it shouldn't matter," he said. "What I do, what I've built, what I've earned. None of that should be the reason a man treats me with basic dignity." He paused. "If I have to announce my title to deserve to be treated like a human being, then the system is already broken. And I am not going to pretend it isn't." Callum looked at his father for a long time. Something was moving across his face that was difficult to name. Not just understanding. Something deeper than that. The particular feeling of a door opening that you did not know was closed. He nodded once, slowly. Harlan started the car. They drove the rest of the way to Athens in near silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Not the silence of fear or anger or things unsaid. The silence of two people who have just been through something together and are still feeling the shape of it. They arrived at the University of Georgia campus at 8:29. They unloaded the car. They carried the benzine, the lamp and the fan and the sheets up the flights of stairs to a room that smelled like fresh paint and possibility. Harlan set up the desk while Callum arranged his clothes. Sylvia had packed a small note inside the folded sheets. Callum found it, read it, folded it back up, and put it in his pocket without saying anything. When the room was done, they stood in the doorway together. Harlan put his hand on the back of his son's neck the way he had since Callum was small. "You're going to be great," he said. Callum leaned into it for just a second. Then he straightened up. "Dad." He paused. "What happens to him? To that cop?" Harlan looked at his son. "That's not your job to worry about today," he said. "Today you start college." He squeezed once. "That's the only thing that matters right now." He drove home alone. He called his deputy director from the car. His voice was the voice he used in the office. Measured, precise. He described the stop in full. The time, the location, the badge number he had memorized from Gantry's uniform, the sequence of events, the push, the handcuffs, the stated reason of lane departure on a road where no lane departure had occurred. He described Pete Dunbar's truck and the raised phone in the 8 minutes and 41 seconds of footage he was confident existed. His deputy director listened without interrupting. When Harlan finished, there was a brief silence. "I'll have a team on it by noon," the deputy director said. By noon, Pete Dunbar had been contacted. He had already uploaded the video to his personal cloud storage and emailed copies to 3 separate accounts. He had not posted it publicly yet. He was waiting to be asked what to do. He was asked. The video went up at 2:17 that afternoon. Pete titled it simply, "Cobb County Officer Handcuffs Man During Traffic Stop, No Violation Observed." He did not mention who Harlan was. He did not need to. By 5 o'clock it had been viewed 140,000 times. By midnight, 4 million. By the following morning, it was the lead story on every major news network in the country. The footage was clear. The audio was clean. You could hear Harlan ask for the legal basis for the search. You could hear Camry say obstruction. You could hear the handcuffs. You could see the push, frame by frame, replayed in slow motion on screens across America. And then the second story broke. A reporter at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution had pulled Gantry's record. In 11 years with the Cobb County Sheriff's Department, Sergeant Lyle Gantry had conducted 847 documented traffic stops. The racial breakdown was reviewed by 2 independent analysts. Black drivers had been stopped at a rate 340% higher than white drivers in the same patrol zones during the same hours. Of those stops, 61% resulted in no citation, no arrest, and no documented violation. They were stops that began and ended with nothing except a black driver sitting on the side of a road, waiting to be told they could go. 8 formal complaints had been filed against Gantry over his career. 6 were from black drivers. All 8 had been reviewed and closed by the same supervising lieutenant. All 8 had been marked, in the department's internal system, as unsubstantiated. The supervising lieutenant's name was Roger Taft. He had been with the department for 19 years. He had closed Gantry's last complaint 14 months ago with a single line of notation. Officer demonstrated sound judgment consistent with departmental standards. Roger Taft was placed on administrative leave 48 hours after the video went public. The Department of Justice opened a formal investigation into the Cobb County Sheriff's Department's traffic stop practices on a Thursday morning. The investigation was led by a team from the Civil Rights Division. It was the same division Harlan had worked in for 4 years before moving to the field office. He recused himself from the investigation. He did not need to be involved. The evidence would speak for itself. Gantry was suspended without pay pending review within 72 hours of the video going public. His attorney issued a statement saying the stop had been conducted in accordance with departmental procedure and that the officer had acted in good faith based on observed driving behavior. The dashcam footage from Harlan's car, which showed 11 minutes of clean, undeviated driving, was submitted to the investigation the same afternoon. The criminal complaint was filed 3 weeks later. Deprivation of rights under color of law. Title 18, United States Code, Section 242. A federal charge, the kind that does not disappear into a departmental review process. The kind that goes to a federal grand jury and comes back as an indictment. Gantry's attorney advised him to take a plea. He refused. He wanted his day in court. He believed even then, even with the video and the dash cam and the statistical analysis and the 8 buried complaints, that a jury would see what he saw. A man doing his job. A man making a judgment call. A man who had given 11 years to public safety and deserved the benefit of the doubt. The trial lasted for days. The prosecution played Pete Dunbar's video on the first morning. All 8 minutes and 41 seconds. The jury watched Harlan stand beside the car with his hands at his sides. They watched him ask for the legal basis of the search. They watched the handcuffs go on. They heard Gantry's voice on the radio after Renee Fowler told him who Harlan was. They heard the flatness of it, the recalculation. Pete Dunbar testified for 40 minutes. He was a 53-year-old contractor from Marietta, Georgia. He had no connection to Harlan Cross. He had no political agenda. He had stopped because something felt wrong, and he had kept recording because it kept feeling wrong. And he had submitted the footage because he had a son and he could not drive home and pretend he had not seen what he saw. The jury deliberated for 3 hours and 12 minutes. Guilty. Deprivation of rights under color of law. 18 months in federal prison. 3 years of supervised release, permanent revocation of law enforcement certification in the state of Georgia. His name entered into the National Decertification Index, which meant no law enforcement agency in the country could hire him without knowing what he had done. Roger Taft was charged separately with obstruction of a civil rights complaint. He accepted a plea deal. No prison time, but immediate termination, forfeiture of pension, and 5 years of probation. The Cobb County Sheriff's Department entered into a consent decree with the Department of Justice. Mandatory retraining, new protocols for traffic stops, an independent civilian oversight board with actual subpoena power. A formal review of every stop Gantry had conducted in 11 years. 31 of those stops were flagged for potential civil rights violations. 19 of the individuals involved were located and notified. 11 of them filed civil suits. The department settled all 11 before any of them went to trial. Harlan testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee 6 weeks after the verdict. He did not wear his badge. He did not bring his credentials. He sat at the long table in a dark suit and he spoke for 22 minutes without notes. He did not talk about the FBI. He did not talk about his career or his commendations or the cases he had built. He talked about the talk. He talked about sitting across from his son at a kitchen table when the boy was 14 years old and explaining the rules. Not the rules of the law, the other rules. He talked about what it means to be a black man in America who has achieved everything the country told him to achieve, who has given everything the country asked him to give, and who still has to teach his son how to survive a traffic stop. He talked about Callum opening the car door, the way his voice cracked on that single syllable, Dad. He talked about looking at his son and asking him, without words, to get back in the car, to swallow the anger, to trust the process, to believe that the system would eventually work, even when every instinct said otherwise. He paused for a moment at that part. The committee room was very quiet. I have spent 17 years building cases against people who abuse power, he said. I believe in the law. I believe in this institution. But I sat in that car on the side of that road, and I thought about every person who gets stopped the same way I was stopped, and who does not have a dash cam, and who does not have a deputy director to call, and who does not have Pete Dunbar parked 200 feet back with a phone in his hand. I thought about what happens to them. He looked at the committee. That is what we are here to fix. The clip was viewed 29 million times in 48 hours. 3 months later, the Georgia State Legislature passed the Transparent Policing Act. Mandatory body cameras for all uniformed officers. Automatic external review for any stop resulting in arrest where no citation was issued. A statewide database of traffic stop demographics, publicly accessible, updated quarterly. And a provision added at the last minute by a senator from Savannah, requiring that any officer with 3 or more unsubstantiated complaints be subject to mandatory independent review before the complaints are closed. The provision was named informally in the committee notes after no one in particular, but everyone who had followed the case knew where it came from. Lyle Gantry reported to federal prison on a Monday morning in November. He had lost his job, his pension, his certification, and the 11 years of identity he had built around the badge. He had lost the framed commendation letter from the wall of his office. He had lost the youth football coaching position, which the league had quietly asked him to vacate 3 days after the verdict. He had not lost his certainty, not at first. He had maintained, through the investigation and the trial and the sentencing, that he had been doing his job, that he had made a judgment call, that the system had failed him. But there was a moment, in the weeks between the verdict and the reporting date, that he did not speak about publicly. A moment that came to him at 2 in the morning in his apartment, in the silence that follows the end of everything you thought you were. He had watched Pete Dunbar's video again. Not for the lawyers, not for the appeal that was never going to happen, just watched it. All 8 minutes and 41 seconds. He watched himself walk up to the car. He watched his own face. He watched the push. He watched Callum open the door. And he heard his own voice telling the boy to stay in the vehicle. And he heard the edge in it, the hand going to the belt. And he watched Harlan turn and look at his son with that expression. That particular expression that Gantry had not understood in the moment, but understood now. A father telling his son that the world is not finished yet. A father asking his son to trust him. A father choosing, in the most painful way imaginable, to protect his child instead of his pride. Gantry sat in his apartment at 2 in the morning, and he watched it, and something in him that had been very hard for a very long time began, slowly and without ceremony, to crack. He did not call a lawyer. He did not call a reporter. He wrote a letter. It took him for attempts in 3 hours. It was addressed to Harlan Cross. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not explain himself. He did not try to contextualize or justify or reframe. He wrote 3 paragraphs. In the first, he said that he had watched the video and he understood, for the first time, what he had actually done. In the second, he said that he was sorry, not for getting caught, not for the consequences, for the thing itself, for the push, for the handcuffs, for the look on Callum's face when he opened that car door. In the third paragraph, he wrote 1 sentence. I told myself I was reading the situation, but I was only seeing what I had already decided to see. Harlan received the letter on a Wednesday. He read it once, folded it, and placed it in a drawer in his desk at home. Not the office. Home. He did not respond. He did not need to. On a Saturday morning in early spring, Callum came home for the weekend. He was finishing his first semester. He seemed different in the way that people seem different after they have been somewhere unlearned, something unstarted, to become who they are going to be. They sat at the kitchen table, the 3 of them, and ate breakfast. Sylvia made the eggs the way Callum liked them. The morning light came through the window at a low angle and lay across the table in long, warm strips. At some point, Callum looked at his father and said, I've been thinking about law school. Harlan looked up. Civil rights law, Callum said. He said it simply, without drama, the way you say a thing you have been carrying for a while and have finally decided to put down on the table. Harlan looked at his son for a long moment. Then he nodded. They finished breakfast. The morning was quiet. Outside, a car passed on the street. A bird made a sound in the yard. Somewhere down the block, a neighbor's dog barked once and then went silent. The world was not finished yet, but it was working on it. And now I want to ask you something. Not a rhetorical question. A real one. If you had been Pete Dunbar, sitting in that truck 200 feet back, watching a man get handcuffed on the side of the road for doing nothing wrong, what would you have done? Would you have driven past? Would you have told yourself it was not your business? Or would you have pulled over, picked up your phone, and decided that some things are too important to look away from? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story moved you, if it made you feel something real, then do something with that feeling. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Hit that like button. Subscribe so you are here for the next one, because I have more stories like this coming. And I promise you, they only get more intense from here. But before you go, I want you to take one thing with you. Just one. Dignity is not something you earn. It is not something you prove. It is not something that should depend on your title, your car, your clothes, or who your father is. It belongs to every person who draws breath on this earth. And no badge, no uniform, no position of authority gives any human being the right to take it. Harlan Cross knew that. He sat in handcuffs on the side of a Georgia highway and he knew it. And he did not flinch. And he did not break. And he did not stop believing it for a single second. Be that person. The road was empty at 6:47 in the morning, and a man drove his son to college. And the world, slowly, imperfectly, stubbornly, kept working on becoming what it was supposed to be.